So are any of you, does this look familiar to you? Like, do you find your organizations are speaking like this? So too many are speaking like this when they could say this. Your kind support is reaching some of the most remote communities. You help give people the skills and tools they need to grow nourishing food, find safe water, and build stable income for their families. So we're saying the same things, but the second version here, it's much easier to read. It speaks to the heart. It's easy to understand. It's easy to feel or visualize what's going on. So this is just a before and after example I'm showing you, which I'm going to then break down through a whole lot of other examples throughout the rest of the session to show you how to get from that first one to speaking like the second one. So what we'll cover, so I've broken this into three sections, and I will say each one of these three, I normally do as a whole workshop in itself, which we don't have time for today. So I've just pulled a few highlights from each one and some examples. The other thing I'll mention that I said before is normally I do customized workshops for one organization, but because we've got people from all over here, I've done a whole range of examples. So across different causes, that, and hopefully at least one of them will relate to what you do. So we're going to talk about emotive writing first, and then content that's easy to read, and then how to make a strong call to action. So it's the heart, the brain, and then you've got to combine those together to make a strong call to action for your supporters. Okay, so why even use emotive writing? Why am I talking about this so much? It's because people often make decisions based on emotion. So I think we like to think we're rational beings and that we make decisions purely with our brains. But at the end of the day, our emotions win. I don't know if you feel the same way, but I feel it even. You know, when you get that gut feeling, you know, it might say something, oh, that sounds good on paper in my head. But in my heart, in my gut, I'm feeling this is a yes or I'm feeling this is a no. And usually that's going to win. So in fundraising, what we need to do is speak to that, to the emotions, to the feelings, the instinct, that sort of thing is what, and then you back it up with the brain. So you start with the heart, and that's why emotive writing is really important because that's going to be how people decide whether they're going to support you. Okay, and of all the emotions, all the feelings, this is the best place to start is with empathy. So how to put someone, your supporter, the person reading what you're writing, how to put them in someone else's shoes. So what you need to be thinking of, who are your supporters? So actually visualize being one of them. So who are they? Where are they? What are their lives like? What do they care about? And how do you need them to feel? So this is a big one to think about as you're writing. So there's all sorts of organizations and causes out there who come at things from different angles. So how do you need your supporters to feel? So do you want them to feel inspired and uplifted? Or do you want them to feel outraged? Do you want them to feel sickened by something, disgusted? Do you want them to feel heartbroken and saddened? Like, I have to help, I have to do something about this. So there's, and also it's going to be different depending on what sort of communications you're doing. So is it a fundraising campaign, an appeal, or is it a gratitude report? There's going to be different ways you want people to feel after reading this. So what you need to do is connect the donor directly with the impact. So here it is about taking yourself, being the organization, out of the way. So create a direct link between them, the supporter, and the impact they're making possible. So instead of going the supporter, then you, and then the impact, take yourself out and just speak them directly to the impact. So I'll show you what I mean. So here's where the magic word plays a massive role, and it's you. So let me show you an example. So normally a lot of organizations speak like this. So they'll say the organization is helping, and then they talk about their work. Instead, this is where you need to do see where you can swap out some of these organization names and replace it with you language. So your support is helping, and then you insert the outcome. So you're keeping that last part the same. You're just taking the org name out and replacing it with your support. Or even better, I like to just say you. So you are helping. So you are helping provide safe water, or you are helping kids go to school. So whatever it is your work is, instead of talking about it like you do it at people, say they're doing it. They're making it happen. Okay, so I'm going to get into some more nitty gritty here. So to inspire empathy in your supporters, I'm going to share 2 tips with you and break down some examples of how I do it with my writing. So the first tip is called ask the right questions, and I'll go into that further. And the second tip is about using details. All right, so tip number 1. So this is all about what question can you ask people to put them in someone else's shoes and actually use this in your copy. So it can be an introduction to a letter you're writing or an email. It could even be a headline on a whole campaign on a web page. So ask people a question to put them in someone else's shoes. And these are some that I like to do. What would you do if? So whatever the story is you're telling, whatever the cause you're talking about, the area of work you have, what if you put someone else, the person you're talking to, in the shoes of the people you're helping? And ask them, what would you do if? So it's like, for example, one I wrote recently is about the cost of living crisis. What would you do if you had to choose between paying next month's rent and paying for groceries? So what would you do? Another way you can do it is have you ever? So have you ever had to choose between this and this? Or have you ever had to go without this? So put them in the shoes of the story, of the person in the story. And another way you can do this, it doesn't have to be an actual question. So you can say things like, you could open with, imagine having to, and then you can use the example of something that somebody else is experiencing. So this is a sample of a headline I wrote for an organization recently, and then I'll read it to you first, and then I'll tell you what it's about. Imagine returning from the longest journey of your life, only to find there's no place to rest. So this was the headline of a campaign I did recently. It raised $1 million from a very engaged group of donors. And I'll tell you now what we're talking about here. I'm talking about birds. So it's not what I'm asking people to empathize with is the life of birds who are migrating from one side of the world all the way to the other side. And the spots they normally land to rest along the way are now underwater. So what my point is here is that the empathy thing, everyone can empathize, but it doesn't have to be with another person. It can be any being. So can you actually put yourself in the shoes of a bird, of experiencing what they go through? And then the campaign is all about how to save this particular bird species. So my point is that whatever your cause is, even if it's something like conservation, where it might be a bit trickier, or medical research, it can be a little harder to tap into that empathy, but it's absolutely possible. And I will tell you this, what I was given to get to this point was a whole boatload of scientific data. So their researchers provided me all this information about these birds, all these numbers and statistics and photos and species information, and then how about their migration journeys and everything like that. So I had to go through all of that and come up with, okay, how can I get people to respond emotionally to this? And this was the headline. All right. Next tip to inspire empathy. Use details to help put someone in a moment. So this is where a lot of organizations go too broad So they want to talk about all the things all at once. So it's like, yes, let's talk about all our work, everything we do all the time, and let's throw that all at someone. And what happens is it becomes too much for people to connect with. You're going too broad, it's too big. So can you, thinking about your work, can you take a particular moment to put someone in? And I'll show you an example of something I've written. Okay, so instead of this, Mrs. Chen is a participant in the computer skills program. So this is the kind of thing you might be, say you're telling a story in a new supporter newsletter, and you want to tell the story of a particular participant, Mrs. Chen. How can you put people in a moment to connect even more with Mrs. Chen? So instead of this, you could do something like this. Mrs. Chen's face lit up with glee as she sent her very first email to her granddaughter overseas. So what we've done here is it's the exact same story, same program, you're saying the same thing, but you've taken it down to that granular moment, single moment, so that people can actually connect with this person right there in that moment. Okay, so those are my tips for empathy. So now I want to move into storytelling because this is huge. Well, I've picked out some highlights. So I want to talk about what makes the best stories, because sometimes we know a story is good, but we can't necessarily articulate why it's good. So I will share two tips with you. One is what I call, but what does that mean? And the second one is called paint the picture. Okay, so the best stories, there are a few features to them. So they focus on one person's experience. So coming back to the Mrs. Chen thing, instead of talking about all these people are have signed up to do our computer skills program, just focus on one person. They stir emotion and empathy. They're easy to follow and visualize. So a lot of my training is around pace when it comes to storytelling. It's amazing how you can have the best content, but then just deliver it so poorly that it falls flat. So it's got to be easy to follow and visualize. And then use specific details. So people remember these. So you might notice this. I find it when I'm even talking and I'm remembering a story and I'll say something like, you know, this story where the little boy had the red backpack and he was wearing, you know, that sort of thing. So, or the one where the little boy woke up every morning and, you know, had this for breakfast. So it's the particular details that actually stick with people because it's something that other stories don't have. Okay, so I mentioned those two tips that I have. The first one is called, but what does that mean? So this question is gold for asking yourself. So if you ever find yourself you getting that writer's block, you just in a rut, really struggling to tell a story. You've got the information in front of you, but how do you make that into a story? So asking yourself this, it opens the gates in your brain to tell the story. So by saying, but what does that mean? So anytime you say something, you write it down, then ask yourself, but what does that mean? And I'm going to walk you through an example of this in process. All right, so here is something you might receive from your programs team. And it might be a particular statistic like this or a fact. So this one here as an example, 43% of families in our district cannot afford 3 nutritious meals a day. That's powerful in itself. Now, but what does that mean? So this is where you're going to build it into a story. You're going to take this bit of information and make a story. Okay. But what does that mean? That means many children are going to bed hungry. So already and turned a stat into what that means in the lives of the children affected. And you can take it even further. But what does that mean? It means these children struggle to concentrate in school as their stomachs rumble. But what does that mean? They are trapped in a heartbreaking cycle where hunger prevents learning, lack of education limits opportunity, and poverty persists for another generation. So you can see how by just asking, but what does that mean? It forces yourself to go deeper into the story. So you started out with the stat about families not being able to afford nutritious meals, and you've unraveled it into a story. And you can see this is part of the emotive writing as well. You brought emotion to the number. All right, the second storytelling tip is called paint the picture. So I'm going to give you another example of a bit of information that you might receive from your team in the field and it's your job to turn that into a story to communicate to donors. So here's one. So Mary plants rice seedlings. That's the information you have, and it's your job to turn this into a story. And when I say that, I'm not saying make things up. I say draw out the details that are true to this story. So Mary plants rice seedlings. How do we paint this picture? So more details. Mary wakes up before dawn every day to plant rice seedlings. So that's something that you can ask. So, okay, she plants rice seedlings. What does that look like? Does she have to wake up really early to do it? How often is she doing it? And here's more. What does it look like? She stands knee deep in a watery field for 8 hours under the hot sun. So that's where you need to really paint the picture. So what does it actually look like? Often in this example here, we were talking to donors in the US who don't know what it means to plant rice seedlings. They've never done it themselves. They've never seen anyone else do it. They don't know anyone who's done it. So you have to actually paint the picture for them. And how long is it? Is it an all-day thing? So, and under the hot sun as well. This is something you don't necessarily have to go back to your program staff and say, can you give me more details around this? This particular one here, I knew where Mary lives, and I literally looked up the weather there. So what is the weather like during rice season? Is it really hot? Yes. So she's standing outside under a hot sun. And then you can go into, so we said, what does that look like? I mean, how does it feel? So some days her back hurts and her hands blister. So you're really putting someone in this moment, you're painting the picture of what it's like to actually be Mary. And then we're going to go into something really powerful, and it's the why. Why do it? But Mary continues because she knows this harvest is the only way her children will have enough food to eat until the next growing season. So what we've done here, we've painted a picture, we've taken this bit of information here, Mary plants rice seedlings, and we've painted it. So what does that look like? How does it feel to be Mary? And if it's so hard, why does she do it? And that's where you're tapping into the empathy. Why would you do something that is so hard? It's because you have to. Okay, so that's the end of the heart part. So we go first the heart, then the brain. So I mentioned a little bit earlier that we make decisions with our emotions. So we tend to give our heart the first dibs on the decision and then the brain to back it up. So this next part here is going to be all about making copy, writing copy that's easy on the brain. Because as I said before, you don't want to have this amazing story to tell, but then deliver it in a way that's just hard to read. Because if it's hard to read what you're saying, one, people won't read it, so they won't donate, and they probably won't want to hear from you again. So not only will you get low open rates in your emails, low donation rates, you probably get a lot more unsubscribes or people calling up to say, take me off your mailing list because you're just not engaging people. They don't want to read boring or just hard to read things full of jargon. So these are my top tips for readability. Simplify your language, ditch the internal jargon, and write for skim readers. And I'll give you some quick tips on how to do these things. Okay, simplify your language. So if I could say this to you, my intention today is to facilitate you in obtaining enhanced writing proficiencies. That's exactly the same as just saying, I am here today to help you write better. It's the same thing, but one's less obnoxious. All right, the next one. So run from internal jargon. I'm going to list, I've got 3 examples here of internal jargon that I see a lot of people using in supporter-facing communications. So if you see any of these, I'll give you some ways you can translate them. I call it program talk. Support capacity building. So capacity building, that's one that I see a lot. So instead of saying that, just simplify it and say, help people learn skills. Reduce food insecurity, very jargony, means the same as help make sure people have enough food to eat. This one is big in the healthcare world. Improve patient outcomes. All right, so what does that actually mean? There's a few ways you can do this, depending on what it is. Are you saying help people live without pain? Or maybe even help people live? So improve patient outcomes is such a broad term. So actually say what you're saying so that people can relate to. People can relate to feeling pain or wanting to live, wanting to live longer and not have their lives cut short. So instead of improve patient outcomes, say which one of those actually you're saying. Okay, right for skim readers. This one, I'm going to get really technical, but it's so important because people will probably skim read. It's just our attention spans are so short these days. And so I'll often do it. I often skim read something first, so half a second, and then I decide if I want to go back and actually read it properly. So make it easy for skim readers. Short sentences is huge. I tend to try and cap mine at 15 words because after that point, my brain gets tired. And it's like if you have to imagine yourself, if you were to read it out loud, at what point would you run out of breath? Because your brain actually does the same thing. So short sentences, short paragraphs, I aim for 3 lines or less. After that point, it starts to look like a big wall of text, like that first example I gave you at the beginning of this session. And if you find yourself creating a wall of text, you could have a look and see if there are any natural breaks. You could break it up into 2 or even 3 paragraphs. And then this one is one of my favorite tactics in fundraising writing. So you let an important sentence have its own line. And this is really powerful in storytelling when you're creating pace. So if there's a particular point in the story where it's like, this is a really powerful moment, let it have its own line. So an example might be if you're telling a story about an athlete who has overcome incredible hardship and to finally win that competition. So you can say something like you'll be doing the build up and then on its own line, and she finally won that medal. So whatever that moment is, that important sentence, let it have its own line. Let it have all the white space around it. And then, oh, this is another one as well. Super easy, but it helps with skim reading. Just bold or underline particular words or phrases that you want to stand out. So it might be your ask, or it might be the reason your funding shortfall. So there might be particular parts that you just want to stand out. And I often do this when I'm using a quote. Sometimes there's a really large quote and I want to use all of it, but it's looking quite blocky. So I might pick a particular sentence in that quote or a phrase and make that bold or bold and underline it.
Is there too much bold that you can use, Maddie, in a email?
Yes. If you, I find myself doing this too. Sometimes I get too excited with all the bold, and then I have to step back and look at it and realize actually there's more bold than non-bold here. That's having the opposite effect. So yes, you have to, if I were to give you a number, try to keep it under a third. So because if half of it is bold or underlined and half of it's not, it's not going to stand out. It's got to be way less than half. Okay, so now we've talked about connecting with the heart and then we've talked about connecting with the brain. So if you've got both on board, you are ready to make a strong call to action. Now, this is I can spend a whole hour talking about what makes a strong call to action and how to do that, but I've just picked up some highlights here, the top 3 things for you to think about. So your strong call to action will be simple, achievable, and urgent. Simple, achievable, urgent. What is a simple ask? So, one, is it readable? So, coming back to all those things, don't bury your ask in a massive paragraph or don't flood it with internal jargon. Don't make the sentence way too long. So, is it readable? And ask people to do one thing. Again, it's tempting to ask people more than one thing. And I've seen this before with some organizations. I've received letters where it said, please donate to this and then also become a regular giver. And also, can you include us in your will and also volunteer for us? It's just way too many things. Pick a really strong ask that's simple. One thing you're asking them to do. And then is it clear how to do that thing? So is it, let's say it's an email. So are you making it easy for actually people to say yes to that thing? So they're going to click on it, then end up right there on your donation page. So they don't have to click around a whole different things to find how to do the thing you're asking them to do. Achievable. So an achievable ask. Something that one challenge a lot of people have is when a problem feels too big to solve. So if you are, so, I mean, there's so many problems that are too big to solve. Hunger is a massive one. So how can you break it down? That's where you've got to do things like dollar handles. They work really well. So dollar handles is when you say $100 can help this or $50 can do this. So you might say $100 can provide this many meals for kids in schools, or um, or a conservation one could be there's I write for an organization in Australia saving a particular species, and one of the things we need to do is set up cameras to monitor the species, so you can work out how much does it cost for each hour of that camera to be working. There's these epic high tech cameras, so you can break it down. So whether it's something it could be $100 can help. You can also do it for major giving as well. So if you can come up with some dollar handles that are on that $1,000 mark, 5,000, even a $10,000. So how could you package that into something that feels achievable? That donor feels like my money right now is going to do this. And the tangible thing again. So that's where dollar handles also play a big role. So instead of it being this kind of broad, vague thing that they're donating to, they have to feel like it's going to something tangible. And then the last thing is about urgency. Because if you make it an open ask and it's sort of when it's like if you would ask someone to help you, you're like, oh, just whenever you can get to it, whenever you feel like it, it's not going to feel like you need help right now. So if you're saying, please donate now, follow that with why now. So, because people's brains are automatically going to think, why? Why do you need this? So, is it because we have 100 families on our wait list? So, we want to help them now. Or if you're using a deadline, deadlines are really powerful. So if it's, and it might be something like, because I work with organizations in different countries around the world and they all have different tax years. So it might be an end of tax year. So donate now, donate before June 30. Or it might be a Christmas thing, donate before Christmas Eve, or donate before the school term ends. So, but then back that up with a why. So coming back to the families on the wait list. So for example, you might be able to say, donate before and then have your date. So we can tell the 100 families on our wait list that help is coming this winter. See how it's just, if you can make it more specific, people will think like, oh, okay, yes, I have to get my donation in now. That's why, not just put this letter aside on the counter to probably forget about and never do anything about later. You make it urgent. Okay, I raced through that, but to sum up, hopefully what you've learned today is how to raise more funds when you use emotive language to move hearts, write content that's easy on the brain, and then how to take those two and present a strong call to action. And then this is just me. So I am on LinkedIn and I share a lot of these fundraising tips every week. And that's my email right there, which if I don't get to speak to you today and you've got a burning question, you can feel free to reach out to me. And this QR code. So I put together a free fundraising letter writing checklist because I found myself as I'm writing a lot of this content doing things that I've just like a formula. There's a formula to it. I find myself just doing because it's like muscle memory. But I realize you don't know what you don't know. So I actually wrote it all down like a checklist. So you can feel free to use it. It's something I use, and it's things like what I've talked about here. So how to weave in some emotive language, how to make it readable, how to format this letter, how to weave in quotes, all those sorts of things. So if you scan that, you will get my letter writing checklist for fundraising.
All right. Thank you so much, Maddie. Are there any questions out there? Is anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask Maddie? I learned a ton. I took lots of notes actually. And
yeah.
I do emotive writing too. So I do emotive writing for grants. So it's really interesting just to hear it, for fundraising appeals and talking about doing it for individual fundraising appeals. It's very similar for writing grants.
Mm-hmm.
And what I actually was telling somebody the other day that sometimes when people apply for grants, because it's broken up into sections, they forget that they're actually telling a story from section to section. And so they need to tie it all together so that the story makes sense. Even though we're writing in separate paragraphs, we want it all to make sense all together. So
Yeah, I think I've seen it especially in grant writing where you go into this almost like you're a student doing a test where you're like, yes, I just have to plug in the numbers and answer the questions and provide the information. When it's like you said, it's actually an opportunity to tell an emotional story. And one thing I do tell grant writers is imagine the person on the other side of it who's having to read through hundreds of grant applications and it's just so many numbers and just facts and all this dry information. Think what a breath of fresh air it is going to be for them to read a beautiful story. Well, I think
yep,
that's definitely going to help you get the funding.
it is so true. And I have a lot of experience as a reviewer too, on the federal grants. So they're really long and it is so refreshing. The other thing is that I think that sometimes we have some presumed knowledge that we think our donors know because we know it. And because of
Yep.
that, we leave out really, really vital information that would help them understand better.
Yes. Exactly. And that's coming back to the internal jargon thing. So instead of saying something like, you will help reduce food insecurity or something like that, and you forget to speak, like, would you tell your friends and family this is how you do what you do? If you have to use that sort of language, like, would you actually use it in conversation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and something that I noticed that you did and I really appreciate is that I really like to give the person that I'm talking about in my fundraising letters and in my appeals a name. And you always gave yours a name, even in your examples, because if you can try to think of a very specific person that you've served or that you're representing, that makes it so much easier because you're just talking about someone that you actually know. You know, obviously we don't
Yes.
maybe use their real name if we want to protect their identity, but when I'm forming it for my own purposes, having that name in place makes it much easier for me to be able to tell the story about the person.
Yeah. And you can definitely say, do the little asterisk thing and say name has been changed to protect this person's privacy, which frees you up to be able to name someone. Even if you don't, there have been times where we don't actually know the name of the person, and even in animal welfare, a lot of times there will be, I worked with an organization recently where 61 dogs were rescued in this operation. And so there was a photo of one of the dogs, but the dog didn't have a name and we didn't have, so we just came up with one and, well, you can actually just name the dog, but I mean, you can come up with a name and just do the little asterisk thing, which allows you to tell a story about a particular being.
Yes. And sometimes that can also allow you to combine some stories.
Yep.
So that you might have some donors, two donors, or, or not donors, two participants that have a really, really interesting story. And sometimes we can kind of combine some of the details so that we can create that fuller picture for
Yep.
our supporters. And we're not dependent on it being like a real person.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Are there any other questions?
I think it's a bit scary when to speak up on some of these group Zoom things. I get it.
If if you have a question that you think of after we're done, please make sure that you email Maddie. She's super responsive to email and is very excited to share her expertise and her help with others. If you have any questions about fundraising strategies and how to build strategies for your organization, I would love to help you. I also have information on my website that is a fundraising assessment. If you're not sure where you might be struggling and you would like to look, you can visit Nonprofit 411. And we will be sending out a copy of the slides. Again, I did send them earlier, but I'll send a copy of the slides and a copy of the recording so that you can reference back to it. If there aren't any other additional questions, thank you for coming today. We so appreciate you showing up. It's so much more exciting to present to a large group than just to record, for posterity's sake. So we're very grateful for everyone who showed up today. We hope that it has been helpful. Like I said, I took lots of notes, so I know that it has been helpful for me, and I hope that you guys can use it in your work. So thank you very much.
Thanks,
Have a great day.
everyone. Bye.